exactly.
So,
Well,
well,
it's
man,
nice to meet you.
yeah, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. And
Sure.
before we get into your latest album, it's time. I want to know, 4 years ago, this pandemic was really churning and it really hit the artistic community specifically. How did you make it through that time period? And how much was this album influenced by that time?
Heavily influenced. I left the music business in 2003, 2004 was like my last few concerts. I had really bad tendonitis and I had to leave and heal. And it took several years for that to happen. In the interim, I couldn't really get a job because I didn't have any discernible skills because jazz piano was really the only thing I'd ever done.
Yeah.
So I had to start a business, and that business did really well. And we had a facility in Toronto, and I think at the time like 9 or 10 employees, and it was a training company. So we had like 3,500 square feet of like training facility. And of course, Canadian COVID measures were absolutely draconian, like the worst on the planet. And it basically shut that business down.
Wow.
And so I'm left with like lots of time. And my son said, "Well, Dad, it's time to get back into the music business." And I'm like, "Okay, that sounds good." So I started a YouTube channel during COVID. And that's now we're almost 15,000 subscribers, all musicians, because it's a tutorial channel.
Yeah.
And then they just kept asking me, "Well, when are you going to release a new album?" So that's it. So I have this audience now, and they're very supportive. And I basically ask them whatever they want to learn and what tunes they want me to record. So all of the song selections on the album are basically chosen by, I wouldn't call them fans. I would call them like collaborators, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how does it feel? I mean, after all of this time, what's kind of the visceral feeling of having this out, having, the world's picked back up with live shows? How does it feel overall?
Well, it's changed a lot. I remember when I released my last album with Arcadia, when we wanted to do promotion, we hired a publicist, put a bunch of albums in envelopes, stuck a stamp on them, and sent them out. It's not like that anymore. In fact, I'm really struggling with this whole TuneCore DistroKid thing and getting the thing on Spotify and iTunes, and we even did Dolby Atmos for this album. It's still not up. It was supposed to be released on the 28th. So it's that whole part of it is kind of, and I'm technically proficient. I mean, that's kind of what we did in our business. We had a whole digital marketing training company, and we had an actual digital marketing agency. So we were like technically savvy. I had computers up the wazoo. I understand them very well. But releasing this album has been unbelievably difficult with
Wow.
TuneCore. Like they just, I don't know. It's interesting, just as a side note, right? You hit the submit button, and then right when you hit the submit button, there's a little message that says, "Oh, it's going to be a 2 to 3 day review process." And it's like nowhere up until that point, and I'd spent hours uploading music, and the length of the recordings had to be the same for Atmos as well as stereo. And nowhere did it say there's this review process. So I submitted on the 27th, the release is the 28th. Of course, I missed it because there's a review process. And here we are, like 9 days later, it's still not up.
Wow.
So
That's
I'm
insane.
just like, I'm gonna have to hire somebody because I just don't understand. Like it's obviously I'm missing something, or I just chose the wrong provider. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get it. That is unfortunate. I still do get a lot of CDs in the mail, and I actually have a CD player in my car, and I prefer to drive around listening to music, but it is just one of those mediums that's going away. Everything's going digital. It's just getting disseminated. Everything's a little bit different. So, yeah,
I mean, we
it's
still sell. I did a concert on Monday, which is Canada Day for us. Yours is July 4th, ours is July 1st. The concert was sold out, was really good, and we sold a ton of CDs at that event. So people still want them. I'm not sure if they're buying them because they actually have CD players or just because they want one as a souvenir, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So I think to answer your question, I'm excited to be back. I'm not looking to have the same momentum that I had when I was younger
Yeah.
with Arcadia because I just don't have the time or the energy for that. I want to do, I'd be happy with 5 to 10 concerts a year, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just run the YouTube channel. I'm monetizing it already. Like I sell a boatload of sheet music and I sell master classes. There's like a private masterclass area, Zoom master. We do free ones through YouTube on Saturdays, and we're stopped for the summer, but we have paid ones as well. So it's monetizing pretty well. I'm trying to get it to a certain point where I can just dump the business side. Like I'm still running training business pros, the business side of it, and I still have a core group of clients, but I'd really like to leave that behind at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this album?
Well, it's the first album that I've ever recorded by myself. Usually the process is you go into the studio, you're at the mercy of whatever piano is there. Typically they have Yamaha C3s to C7s. That's kind of like the standard studio piano because it's cheap and cheerful. It's tinny as far as I'm concerned. This album was recorded in my home studio. So when I moved to Niagara-on-the-Lake from Toronto, which was right in the middle of COVID, we left Toronto, shut the business down, and moved. Kept the management side of the business, but dumped the facility. It was a huge expense, and we weren't allowed to use it because our government said we couldn't. So we let it go. And I moved to Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I bought a house that had a nanny suite, and it was huge. It had like it was like a whole self-contained unit, and it's separate from the main part of the house. And it was perfect for putting the piano in there. I have a beautiful 7 foot German Ebach concert grand piano. Basically, it's ivory keys. It's very rare. And if you don't know who Ebach is, they came before Steinway. In fact, Steinway bought the rim design for their pianos from the Ebach family. So they've been around a long time.
Yeah.
They only make like 100 pianos a year. They're out of business for like, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years now, but they were like the longest existing grand piano manufacturer in the world. And I just wanted to record on that piano. So rather than get a bunch of movers to take it into some studio and not necessarily knowing how to deal with that, I basically bought recording gear and just kept recording because I have to record everything for the YouTube channel. I have to record whatever. So I learned that process of how does this piano sound best when mic'd. And so for the listener, I want them to feel like they're actually getting me at my living room best, if that makes sense. Like, even though it's like a studio, it's still a place that I go 2, 3, 4 hours a day to make tutorials, to do master classes, to practice, get ready for concerts. And I want people to feel like they're just alone in that space, sounding like that space, sounding like that piano. I think this might actually be, and I don't know how to do research on this. Maybe you have an idea. How would you find out if this is the only jazz piano album that was ever recorded on an Ebach grand piano? Because
I
it's a very rare instrument.
I bet you there's a way that you can fashion keywords in Google to find out.
I
I bet
tried that. I couldn't find anything.
interesting. Um, I'm trying to think what kind of guru out there would have a real good bead on that.
I'm
Let
sure
me,
there's a I'm sure there's a boatload of classical
yeah, yeah.
albums,
Yeah,
but jazz, I don't know.
yeah,
I mean, you'd have to find a studio that actually has one
yeah,
in
yeah,
order for that to happen. And again, that's not a real good studio choice because they're pricey.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like it's more than 6 figures.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
So I don't know too many studios that have budgets for that. I mean,
Yeah.
they have budgets for gear and recording gear and stuff like that, but for piano like that, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, it's just about them feeling like an intimate moment together, just the two of us, kind of like you're getting the sound that I hear from the piano.
So, how did this journey into the music begin? More specifically, jazz. How did all this begin and take hold?
Well, like most people who play for a living, I started young. I was 8. I learned from the United Church minister. So my dad was the minister. I heard the organist jamming on his organ one day, and I went up to him at like I was 7, and I said, can you teach me to play that like that? And he goes, no, I can't. I was like, why not? He goes, because your legs are too short. You can't reach the pedals yet. We'll start you on piano, right? So I started on piano and I never stopped. And then by the time I finished high school and went through their music program, I went to work because we weren't very, we were not an affluent family. I mean, my dad was a minister, right? So I went to work at a factory and I broke my leg on the job and I got this thing called workman's compensation. So I took the money and went back to music school. And in the first semester at that school, I applied for and got in immediately, even though it was like halfway through the year. Because I could have never afforded it without the workman's compensation. So I went to it, and in the first semester, a bunch of us got together and went to see Oscar Peterson play in Toronto. And that was it for me. It was like,
Yeah,
okay, I need to know how to do that.
yeah,
How can I do that? Because it was like probably the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life. And you have ears for it, right? It just kind of like bends your ear in the right way. And you just say to yourself, there's no way I'm getting out of this lifetime without learning more about how to do that.
yeah,
So that was it for me. And then after college, I funded my way through university. By that time, I was good enough. I just gigged my way through university, like playing 5 to 8 at hotels, playing. I did 2 years at Hotel de la Montagne in Montreal, like playing jazz. I just worked my way through school. And I learned a lot at school. I don't think they know much about the bandstand or how the business music world works, like the business side of it. So I had to learn that. And over the next several years, I just kept going and then eventually signed with Arcadia. He saw me I was playing in The Hague in the Netherlands. And Bob Carsey comes up to me and he goes, are you being represented by anybody? And we're like, well, I've released a bunch of albums, but self-released. He goes, well, would you like to have a conversation? I said yes. And then he gave me a big check and away we went. And then I got tendonitis from overplaying. I had really bad posture. Anyway, does that answer your question? I think
100%,
yeah,
100%. So I'm curious in this journey into the music, what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What is it that motivates you the most?
playing live.
Yeah,
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I like trio format because I have a lot to say, I think, anyway. So when I play with the trio, there's like this conversation between bass drums, and it's always different depending on who the musicians are. But for me, because I learned this in the training company, there's a way to interact with audiences that most musicians have never learned about. So it's even more a pleasure these days to perform because I know how to communicate with audiences. Typically, what artists do is they speak at audiences. I speak with them.
yeah,
So there's a conversation that happens, and I know how to enroll and engage an audience from the very first second to the very last second of a concert. And my reviews are always amazing because people just enjoy themselves.
yeah.
So for me, that's the most important part is people, are they actually taking in the music? Are they understanding the music? Are they getting involved? Are they having an interactive and immersive, engaging time? And that's the most important thing to me.
So why do you love jazz?
Oh, it just sounds great.
I agree.
It's sophisticated. I think we can agree on that. It's probably from an art form standpoint, it's probably the most sophisticated music there is on planet Earth. Because even though there is evidence of classical improvisation, it tends to be very limited, and it was limited more to the masters, like Bach would improvise. But even then, they had a very limited palette to work with. They had once in a while, they might have had a seventh chord, but in most cases they were dealing with triads and diminished chords. And they created dissonance out of diminished chords. They didn't have the type of chords we have today, which are like essentially 7-note chords. There are obviously 8-note chords and 9-note chords, but the basis of most jazz is like each chord is like 7 notes, not 3. So that gives us quite a bit more latitude when it comes to connecting those chords together. So when you connect chords, you have leading tones that lead somewhere, you got inner voices. I mean, if you talk like Bill Evans, it's like all I have to do is, even if I just make the best jazz progressions I can and I do it in my closet, eventually someone's going to come along and say, hey, we're looking for you, because there's a sound that it makes that it's unique, very unique to jazz, especially on the piano. Now, a guitar player, well, obviously single note instruments can't do that. They do it through solo lines, which connect those 7-note chords together through single notes. Instrumentalists like pianos and guitars, where we have multiple notes, vibraphone, organ, whatever, we have multiple ways to connect chords. And very often, every single finger is engaged at the same time, not in succession. So that's a very interesting thing. To me, when those chords move in such a way that it creates a dissonance and resolve that is unique to the ear can hear it. It just doesn't necessarily understand it.
Yeah.
So you can hear another great player and they'll play something, they'll play a progression that you've not done yourself, and your ear will immediately latch onto that and go, how do I make that sound? So even if you're listening to, say, Opposite Sides of the Universe, Keith Jarrett versus, I don't know, B.G. Adair, something like that. Like B.G. Adair would be more tonally sophisticated, where Keith Jarrett would be more atonally sophisticated. So sometimes combining those two things. And then Bill Evans would be more like block chord sophistication, 6 diminished scales, things like that. So to me, that's like the math of it is very interesting, but ultimately the sound that you get from it is the thing that you're just drawn to.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, Paul. Family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm a creator. I'm a content creator. That's the way I've been actually labeled that by YouTube. So there's a YouTube content creator program, which I am part of. And I thought that's a great name because that's what I do. That's what I did in business. That's what I did in the music world before I left it. That's what I'm doing now as being back in the music. I'm just producing content. So whether that's recordings, concerts, videos, master classes, whether it's helping people learn or helping people understand, or just even simply just performing for the joy of performing and people consuming it, that's creation. You're creating things. You're leaving a legacy of sound behind you. And in my case, not just sound, it's more like video and sheet music. I make a ton of sheet music because people are constantly asking me for my reharmonizations written out because they're too hard to lift with your ear, especially if you don't have perfect pitch, right? You're trying to lift. I'm playing 7 notes at one time, which leads to 7 more notes, which leads to 7 more notes, and sometimes more. And then there's leading tones and everything in between. The ear can't, it's not strong enough to hear all that. So we're like, okay, just write it out and we'll buy it. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
So to me, that's all content creation.
Yeah. Yeah. So It's Time is the new album. If anyone wants to pick it up physically, catch you live, anything else you've done, where's the best place to go?
PaulTobey.com.
Okay.
Tobey.
Excellent. Paul, this has been great. Thank you. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your time. Best of luck with the release of this. It's a great story.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, you bet. And before